when I gave the interview, or when I gave the lecture at the Spring Valley Library, it created such an uproar, nearly caused my divorce from Marilee, because so many people were calling, the phone was ringing off the hook, people that wanted copies of this and copies of that, and would I give them an interview, and she was just going out of her mind, and she finally took all my files and hid them, and changed my phone number so that nobody could contact me. And but they still got a hold of me. That's how I ran into Bob Lazar. Is one of the guys that called and wanted information was Gene Huff, and he said, I told him what I just told you, is Marilee's taken everything. He says, well, you know, if you can ever retrieve it or get it, he said, I'd like to have a copy, and I'll trade you a appraisal of your house. And so Marilee and I have continually broke. I went to her and he says, okay, well, let's do that. So she gave me enough material to give to him to get the appraisal. And he still complains about that, even though it's been 30 years, that he had no idea that the appraisal was of a 7,700 square foot house that he was forced to give an appraisal for the stuff I had. And so when he came over to do the measurements, he brought a friend of his who he introduced as Bob Lazar, and Bob handed me a copy of his resume and graduation certificates from MIT and Caltech. And I put them, just behind my desk, like, reach back and put it there for filing, and never saw him again. When it became important,
right.
But so much stuff has disappeared from
really?
From this den. It's been there's always monitoring 24/7. My kids at the time were teenagers, and they were continually wanting to change numbers and switch phones and stuff. So we had one Centel guy, and those days it was called Centel, coming up here to do the work. And he came in one day and he said, John, your phone's tapped. And I said, I figured that. And he said, do you mind if I find out where the tap is coming from? I said, help yourself. So he came back about a half hour later and he said, I went down Monroe to Hollywood to Nellis, or Hollywood to Bonanza, and Bonanza down to Nellis, and it's further than that, the tap. And he said, I'm going to have to go to the mainframe, and I'll do that tomorrow. But this is kind of interesting. So a couple days later, he comes in, shows up at the door, and says, John, I can't work on your phones anymore. And I said, why? He said, your phone is tapped at the mainframe, and there is no paperwork to accompany it. And I went and told my boss, and she said, if I didn't like my job, I could quit. And he said, I need this job, so
Great. Yeah.
That was the last I saw him. And then Bob phone was tapped. All of our phones were tapped, and
Yeah, no, I want to ask you about Bob Lazar because, he came back out. He did an interview, I guess, with George Knapp not long ago. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
a
was-
year or two ago, 3 years or 4 years.
he did part of it here and part of it
All
at,
right. So he came out and then he disappeared again. And from what I understand, he actually went back to work for them again. Now, is that what you know, or is that?
I heard that story, and I asked Bob about it. He said, well, if it's true, how come all the people that I work with here at my business see me all the time, and I've never disappeared for any length of time.
Okay, but
but
he
the
stopped
people-
talking.
But
He stopped talking. He doesn't want to do any more interviews, apparently.
No, he talked with George, and
Yeah, that was it.
well, he didn't do anything before that, actually.
Right. No, I've asked him a number of times.
Oh,
He's not doing interviews. That's what I heard.
okay. He may be working there, but if he is, boy, I'll tell you, it's really a well organized job, because he'd have to get from Detroit, Michigan to the test site forever how long they wanted to work there.
Well, I mean, this day and age, first of all, I don't know, maglev trains, etc. But aside from that, you can still work for somebody, from your house, right?
Absolutely.
So, you have a secure server, whatever it is. It just doesn't rule it out. That's all I'm saying.
No.
I can't make any conjecture about what he's doing or what he isn't doing. It's kind of interesting, though. So, have you heard of the Venture Star?
The what?
Venture Star.
Yeah, what is that?
So it's a sort of a slightly triangular, but it's not a triangle. It's and it was said to be, it was coming up out of the ground, according to Gordon Neville, it was coming up out of the ground up in somewhere near, I think it was Dugway, Utah. And it would go take a bunch of scientists. It wasn't a huge plane. It's been in several, actually a kind of facsimile of it in several movies, and it's been on the internet. There's a photograph of it. It's a very nice looking kind of rounded triangular plane, but it's kind of narrowish. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it carries, I don't know, scientists supposedly back and forth to, I don't know, Mars or the moon. That's the story. Just wondered if you'd heard that.
I heard that story from several different people. One guy represented himself as having worked on it at the Skunk Works, and he had convinced a friend of mine that Bob Lazar was full of it, that thing was what they were working on, and on and on and on. And I eventually proved to these guys that Bob was the real deal, and at least I thought he was, and that picture surfaced. Another one that Gordon Neville was showing around was something that stupid ass, what do they call it? This thing that looked like a triangle and it had seats like that. And this is the one that was supposedly shown off at Norton Air Force Base to the congressman. Do you remember that?
I think so.
Anyway, Gordon Neville used to show that around, and Gordon and I had disagreements over the years. I guess he finally passed away here a couple of years ago.
That's right. He went into the hospital with, from what I understand, a toe injury, and he never came out again.
Oh, really?
And right before he died, he called me up, and I talked to him. I was actually driving across the desert at the time, back from some conference or whatever it was, and he told me that, he was trying to put together a team to build the reverse engineered, craft, and I think it's called the RV something. Anyway, and he actually gave me a picture of it.
That's
anyway,
what this is.
And he was working with Mark McClandlish on it and all that stuff. And he had Hal Puthoff and a whole bunch of scientists and a bunch of people involved in what he was trying to do to build this craft. He needed funding, and he was you know who Ron Pandolfi was or is, and he was head of the so-called strange desk at CIA back in those days. But at the same time, he was always the handler for Gordon. He and Ron Pandolfi used to be on the ins or the outs. They had a very sort of tumultuous relationship, but
Yeah.
he really seemed to like Ron Pandolfi a lot. But apparently, the time he talked to me right before he died, he said he was fed up. They seemed to be using him almost like a patsy.
Yeah.
And he said he had funding, and he was going to. He finally he was going to go to the Arabs for funding because he was sick of the being run around the block by, you know, Hollywood and the United States and all this stuff. And then he died. So I actually think he died because they made it, you know, happen. I'm sure that my opinion on this is probably not going to be popular with the family, but that's
The opinion of what?
that he was probably knocked off.
Yeah, you know, he was so out in left field on his stuff. Maybe he was, but I don't think he knew enough to be knocked off.
Well, apparently putting this company together that he was trying to do, and he was trying to, you know, he's trying to basically build a UFO, and they didn't want him to. And the last thing they wanted him to do was get funding. I even went to a meeting where he was meeting with a top Hollywood entrepreneur, executive, whatever. And I'm not going to say the guy's name, but he was legitimate. And they were, you know, they were moving forward. Whether you want to believe what, you know, they could achieve, I don't know. But, you know, he had a binder this thick of plans, etc. I mean, he wasn't idle towards his death. So it's interesting.